The high percentage of mental health cases in Nigeria has surely but steadily become a matter of genuine public concern, especially to stakeholders in primary healthcare delivery. These frontline fighters are not only battling with insufficient financial and structural support, but also against damaging stigmas and societal misconception around the entire range of mental health challenges. To many Nigerians, even in 2023, mental health challenges are easily interpreted as madness. However, experts say there is more to this cankerworm than many are willing to believe. We are now being joined by Lade Olugbemi, who is the Councillor for the Royal Borough of Greenwich and Chair of the UK Labour Group in Greenwich as well. Many thanks for being here. We appreciate, of course, you being in the studio with us today. I just want to go straight into it and just start as your role as a councillor and the chair of the Labour Group in Greenwich. You've been very active in addressing mental health issues. I want to know what your current perspective is on the state of mental health awareness and support in Nigeria, especially when it comes to in terms of legislation. What is your current view of it as it stands in December 2023?
Okay, we have come a long way, and I'm really glad to say. Before 2021, we had the Lunacy Act, which is an old act that had been fully operational in Nigeria. But very much thanks to Senator Olugbemi, my organization, which is quite local, actively in Nigeria as well, called the News Organization, we actually did have a conference, the first international conference on suicide prevention. And one of the assurances that Senator Olugbemi, who was the chair of the health committee in the Senate then, gave us that he was going to push to make sure that we have the Mental Health Act. And in 2021, we had a conference in 2019. And in 2021, I'm sure quite a lot of NGOs in Nigeria and a lot of us, outside watching, observing and supporting, we're very, very glad to see it become an act. It's no longer just a paper exercise. But there's still a lot of work to be done on the ground, still a lot. It's not good enough to have an act. It's like having a bulldog that is tied down and not able to work. The whole essence of having the act is about being able to fully implement it. And the act is very robust. I'm very much aware that we had quite a lot of people from various sectors, both the voluntary sector organizations, what we call the NGOs here, people who are experts by experience, and also clinicians sat down to write that act. But however, there's a lot more that can be done. And that's one of the things that I'd like to talk about today. It's not enough to have the act out there. We need to use the instrument. We need to implement what the act says.
And unfortunately, implementation is not our strongest point in Nigeria, especially when it comes to areas that are a little bit confusing or not well defined. And unfortunately, it seems mental health issues are because as soon as you hear mental, you think like crazy, right? I mean, even the Lunacy Act, the name itself just suggests something a little more negative than necessary. Absolutely. Because it is an illness. Mental health is just like physical health and spiritual health. But in Nigeria, as it is, it hasn't been implemented. But what kinds of discussions need to be had, and in what places do these discussions need to be had in order to dispel some myths and rumors and just give some more understanding about what mental health awareness can be and what mental illnesses can, how they can manifest themselves? Where do we start?
You start from both top down and bottom up. You can't, in my own view, you don't just start from one place. There's a need to do the grassroots mobilization. There's a need to do the awareness. There's a need to do the capacity building, the training. There's a need to make sure that our primary care sectors are in place, ready to be able to respond appropriately. There's a need to make sure that the hospitals are set up. There's a need to make sure we have the right type of medication that is affordable. There's a need to bring what I call public-private partnership the 3 Ps. And this is really important. This is one area where at the moment, oftentimes, people concentrate and think the government should do this, the government should do that. But I believe very strongly that we need to collaborate with the private sector. We have a lot of pharmaceutical industries in Nigeria at the moment. They're the ones manufacturing the medication. We need to collaborate, not just in Nigeria. We need to be talking. We need to be looking outside as well. There's a lot of international agencies out there more than happy to come in once they see that there's an infrastructure on ground, things they can build on. Part of what my organization have in mind, long-term plan, is actually to kind of organize something like the Mentorship. For those who are aware of what the Mentorship is. So the Mentorship is a very long project that clinicians, all forms of clinicians come in and they sail on a ship and they berth on one of the coasts and people come in. They perform operations, they do all kinds of things, all pro bono, sponsored sometimes by the clinicians themselves and by private people as well. And I'm very much aware that there are people in UK, in America, who are willing to come down here pro bono to work on the ground to help to diagnose where necessary. I'm aware that we can work with some pharmaceutical organizations to provide cost-effective medication. I'm very much aware at the moment that antipsychotic medications are extremely expensive. So if a person has ADHD, if a person has schizophrenia, if a person has bipolar, do you know how much it costs for them to maintain their medication every month? It's going over 100,000. And how will the common man be able to afford that? So that's why for me, it's not just talking at the top level. I'm glad we have the Mental Health Act, but there's a need to talk at the middle level, to engage with most of the organizations, and also to talk at the grassroots level as well. A lot of mobilization has to be done. And there's another key point that I'll mention later, and that is around training. Yeah.
All right, then. Before we come to that, you had touched on the stigma around mental health and even suicide in the community, and I would like to bring that in. And, there was even a video of yours that I watched where you were emphasized on the importance and the significance of open conversations about mental health. This is what we're doing now. But if we start to look at, leaving the onus at the feet of, communities, how can we start to foster that environment where such conversations are encouraged? And what role can these, community leaders play in initiating and sustaining these dialogues?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, because suicide prevention is it's a pet program of mine. And the reason why it's pet to me is because in the UK where I practice, we have the statistics. I don't have the statistics for Nigeria. That at each given time, 65% of the population are thinking of taking their life. Yes. Either because there's been a relationship breakdown, a financial breakdown, a job restructure, all kinds of things, a health issue. We know people who have terminal illnesses. Sometimes people just wish, I'd just rather go. There's no point hanging around. So I believe very strongly that suicide can be prevented, may be prevented, will be prevented, but several things have to be done in between. And one of it is raising awareness, making sure that we reduce the stigma that we have in the community at the moment around people who have attempted suicide and they did not complete it.
I mean, there are people that have to, there's the conversation about paying a fine,
Lagos State at the moment, I'm proud to say, because we're a federation, so each federation has its local law. So within Lagos State, it's not a crime. But there's still states in Nigeria where if you attempt suicide and you're not successful, or I don't use the word successful, and you don't complete suicide, it is actually a criminal offense. And that's why in Nigeria, people still say you committed suicide. One of the key things that I talk about reducing stigma is our use of language. I like how you mentioned earlier about the fact that we still call people mad, weary, skoin, yaba left. We've used all kinds of very negative words to describe mental ill health. We don't use that for cancer. We don't use that when a person has a broken leg. We don't use that when a person is using glasses. Using glasses is because you have ill health with your eyes. We don't use derogatory words to describe people. Although they used to use derogatory words to describe people with, that use glasses before. They used to say 4 eyes. Now they don't. But it's because there's been a progress, there's been a journey. If there's anything we need to be doing now, it's about capacity building. How are our services? And when I talk about services, I use this word, our gatekeeping services, our police, the firemen, the hospitals, the teachers. How are the gatekeepers trained and empowered to be able to spot the signs of suicide? Oftentimes, not all the times, but about 90% of the times, those who complete suicide have given signs. They may have said a word. Sometimes people don't. I usually correct people that it's not every time they say, because sometimes people don't. Somebody is just like a rash decision. They take it and, and they just decide that I've had enough. I'm ready to go. But oftentimes people say, they give signs. And I believe that the onus is on all of us in the community. So I'm a suicide first aid prevention instructor. I teach people how to be able to prevent suicide. I teach people how to be able to provide first aid when a person has mental health issues. So we cannot all be clinicians. It takes about 7 years for you to be a psychiatrist. And we know, fortunately or fortunately for us, I don't know how you want to describe it, a lot of the clinicians were having a jackpot. I read recently that about 2 wards in Louth have been closed because they have maybe 1 or 2 anesthesiology. Most of them have gone. So if there's anything we need to do now to make sure we close the gap, it's about how we empower ourselves at the local level. Making sure, we're not saying you become a psychiatrist, we're not saying you become a psychologist, but there's some key things. So mental health first aid training is a training that I want to bring into Nigeria. This is mainly to help all the gatekeepers, community leaders, mothers, fathers, uncles, whatever position you are in the community, where we're able to be able to train you to recognize the 6 common mental ill health, depression, all the forms of anxiety, depression, anxiety, suicide. There's 6 of them. We're able to teach people, okay, how do you spot the signs? How do you know? When you spot the signs, how do you hold a person on until they get the first aid? The training is very similar to physical first aid, where you're there, you help people, you put them in a recovery position and all of that. That's exactly what it's like. We need to be able to do that at the local level. Suicide can be prevented. It's about teaching people how you take a person through that, what I call a fierce conversation. You bring them to a place where they can pause and think. Yes, you've lost a job. You've lost a family member. You think there's no hope. Let's go back. And we pause.
Well said.
And think.
Well said. In this, with the way the country is going right now, you can see that there would be a reason why mental health cases would be triggered and increased, but sometimes a listening ear is all one needs. I also think maybe a National Day of Hugs might work.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic idea. It's a National Day of Hugs. It's a National Day of Gratitude. Right. Tell me what you're grateful about. Because oftentimes you realize that when you sit down and you count the blessings, you realize you actually have more that you think you don't have.
Yes, but sorry, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It was a great conversation, obviously. Lade Hepzibah Olugbemi, the Councillor Royal for the Borough of Greenwich and the Chair of the Labour Group. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you.